Are we there? Right, good evening everybody. Welcome on the Stroker 6 to members of the public and visiting councillors, and of course a huge welcome to Cabinet too. Right, so the usual we have to say, for good reason, were we to have an emergency, and to say there's no practice alarms planned, but if one did, would evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the high street, then to the car park behind the town hall. In the case of disturbance, which requires us to withdraw, we'll withdraw to the Mayor's Parlour. For those watching, you will know, but this meeting is being streamed live over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and be available to listen to afterwards. Use of mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, by any of us here, by visitors, and I shall now go make sure mine is off as well. That's welcomed. Please do use them discreetly and do not disturb the meeting. Silent and voice or camera flash functions, if you can avoid that, would be great. Microphones to be used, fellow speakers at all times, and those who come to attend a Cabinet. Let me introduce the work of the Cabinet. We're the main executive body of the Council. We're responsible for day-to-day decision making on all Council services, and we make recommendations to full Council, that's all councillors, on major policy issues and on the Council's budget. Cabinet's made up of 7 councillors, each of whom is responsible for a particular range of services. Apologies, first of all, from Councillor Paul Smith, who is away. My colleague, Councillor Andrea Luxford-Vaughan, I know you've had a moment on the way in, what you're making. If you do not feel that you can stay, then I'll understand if you have to step away. Right, so let me ask that we introduce ourselves, and my name is David King, leader of the Council. I'll go to Councillor Alison Jay, and we'll go around the table.
Alison Jay, and its portfolio holder for economic growth and transformation.
Councillor Natalie Summers, portfolio holder for communities, heritage and public protection.
Richard Clifford, Democratic Services Manager.
Andrew Weavers, Head of Governance and Monitoring Officer.
Pam Donnelly, Chief Executive.
Mark Corey, portfolio holder for resources and representative of Wivenhoe Ward.
Councillor Andrea Luxford-Vaughan, portfolio holder for planning, environment and sustainability and ward councillor for Wivenhoe.
Martin Goss, Mylin Ward, neighbourhoods and waste portfolio holder.
Urgent items?
There are no urgent items, Chair.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. I invite Cabinet members to declare any. I'm aware of none. I see none. So item 4 are the minutes. I invite Cabinet to approve the minutes of the meeting of the 10th of July. Approved? Thank you. Item 5 is have your say, and we've got a number of speakers. 5 here, and then we've got some more on other items. So I'll take them in the order I have them in front of me. First of all, Mr. Alan Short. Alan, you know this very well. Please come forward. Thank you. 3 minutes, 2 minutes, there'll be a bell. Thank you.
So it appears we have a surplus of student accommodation. I'm not going to say we told you so, but we did. The unnecessary plans to lease the so-called Painter's Yard to Alumno for 336 student flats was an expensive disaster. We said it would be over provision. The university said there was no need for the development, and the effect of the Brexit decision is already having an input. The planned development of student flats was an expensive and unnecessary mistake for which none of those involved have paid the price. Now is the time for the scrutiny panel to investigate this. When the Design Council was asked for their views on the Alumno plans, one of their comments was that if student flats were to be built, they should be larger, so if demand wasn't there, they could be used for other purposes. My concern with the current plans to use student accommodation for the homeless is that privately designed student flats will be tiny, with often shared kitchens, and except in dire circumstances for single people, they are less suitable than some hotel accommodation. Have the council considered the tax problems of taking over either part or whole of a block? Any student accommodation built in the last 10 years, if used for non-students, will immediately be liable for VAT on the major costs of the development. Those, whether students or not, will become liable for council tax. There may not be a problem for homeless families, but any others using one or more of the rooms who are students will then have to pay council tax. I know that temporary accommodation is necessary, but I suggest that perhaps if members of the Cabinet and their families spent a week in such accommodation, they would see that something more is required. I did think that the Council were considering some form of prefabricated temporary dwelling. What happened to this civilised idea?
Thank you, Alan. I understand your deep and long interest in alumno. There will be a time for that conversation and for scrutiny, but it's not now. I won't even say why, other than we are in a commercial and legal set of arrangements which are complex and not yet at a close. When they are, then referral to scrutiny, I expect, would follow as an issue of interest to many. Let me take up your other points. I can't argue for your commentary, for or against, upon what might have been designed and built, because that's not really the point. The point here is that we have heading toward 400, it's over 370 now, households who are facing homelessness, and there's duty on the council to house them, which we will continue to meet despite the significant financial burden. I guess you know all of that. We have to do so in the most cost-effective way that we can, while still meeting standards of supply. So in the detail is a promise that we are looking at what we may take on here with scrupulous detail to ensure that it is appropriate for need. What I can tell you, it's a sad thing to say, better than some of the temporary accommodation, bed and breakfast and the like, which we have no choice but to use at this moment. And it's sad to know that we have hundreds in that position. This will be a much better proposition. It will be managed well. It will be in Colchester, not beyond Colchester. And it will help the social life and continuity of the family. So we are clear, and we are undertaking the investigations you'd expect we should, that this would be a good choice if it's concluded. And although it would be student accommodation, it would be appropriate for the needs of many, which we must meet, and to do so as cost effectively as we can. To prefabs, we've looked at that in considerable detail. We were quite excited about the possibility, but simply put, and these aren't the words I'm being given, but I was in those conversations, the numbers did not stack up in terms of what we could create as demand, and in terms of the pricing and the lifelong costs of such a provision. We've been to see, and others have before us, where there are examples and they are attractive. But in terms of the bottom line, it's not as effective as traditional construction, and that's the route we're going at this time. If you'd like to return, comment, that'd be fine.
Well, of course, the housing for temporary accommodation for those who are homeless is very important. But the question here is, it's the cost, isn't it? It's got nothing to do with availability, it's got to do with how much it costs. And the reason that the council is short of money is twofold. The first being the dreadful Tory government and the way that they've cut payments to councils all over the country. And we're not in a very different position than others. One of the ways of trying to overcome that, and I spoke long at a meeting I had with Adrian Pritchard, was to try and generate some cash ourselves. But in most cases, that's been an abysmal failure. I mean, we now have a load of holes in the ground as part of our assets, which are slowly filling up with water from one of the things, and that we've closed down most of the other amphora projects. And it's all because we don't have the money. Something needs to be done. Something needs to be done to look after the poor and the sick and those most vulnerable. And that is not happening.
Thank you. And of course, that's a central mission for us, which we do. We help tens of thousands every year, very directly, in the best way we can, particularly through housing support and supply, which is to a standard that it should be at. Thank you for switching that off. Next, have your say. Ed Barrett.
Hello, thanks for
Thank you.
listening to me. Yeah, this concerns the enforcement of tree preservation orders in the Garrison Conservation Area. In June of this year, a private company, whose identity is known to me, but I won't divulge here and now, attended the Garrison Conservation Area and undertook significant tree surgery on, I estimate, 8 trees. Including the topping, radical reshaping, and significant work on those trees. All of this was done without written permission. As far as I'm aware, I've checked quite carefully and I can find no evidence of any record of written permission, which raises a question about the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990, I think. All of these trees are of considerable significance, quite clearly. They're part of the original plan, the 19th century plan for the Garrison site. Some of them, a number of them, are on the site of the Roman Circus. They are therefore of heritage value. They are also of community and aesthetic value because of, one can judge that by the level of kind of response there was on social media in the immediate aftermath of this. And most of all for me, I guess I would highlight the environmental and ecological value of those trees, of course, because of the way in which they are life-giving, enabling the mitigation of climate change, and so forth. So we're talking about something, I think, of considerable significance for the council and for the area. Now, it seems to me there are several different kinds of potential, at least, legal issues at stake in this. There's the question of legality in relation to conducting work of this kind without permission. There's also the fact that this work was conducted during nesting season. This was in the middle of June, so there's a question about whether or not the necessary surveys were undertaken. And various issues along those lines. I would also add that I'm aware of previous incidents where work has been undertaken in the area without any obvious evidence of permission having been gained for it, including the felling of a large tree in an area known as the Pocket Park. And in addition, I would point also to evidence of another tree being felled during the same period, a tree being felled during the months of June this year as well. So we're talking about significant work. I would urge you to undertake an investigation of what took place. I would urge you to make the outcome of that investigation public so that people know that it's been taken seriously, including the perpetrators who will remain nameless for now at least. It is extremely dangerous to be in a situation where there are planning rules and guidelines and these are not being enforced, and this has consequences for everything, it seems to me, that is done in the field of planning. I would urge you to investigate how this situation came about in the first place, and I would remind you of the fact that evidently there are kind of legal obligations on the council in respect of the preservation of trees in this situation. I'll say no more.
Thank you. And Andrew.
Okay, thank you for coming tonight. Firstly, I think I can't say that word. People who do trees are very much aware of the legislation, so is the enforcement team. I've spoken to officers today and they've said that there was definitely permission sought and granted for pollarding of trees in the area, and also the felling of 2 trees, again in the same area. and they're also aware of your concerns, and apparently also councillors have written in. And what the team has said is, unless the detail is more specific, as in this tree here, they can't actually progress it, because as far as they know, what's been done has got permission. If there has been a breach of that permission and things have happened outside of that permission, then all they need is the detail. They will investigate and they will prosecute if there's a case. What I would also say is that I haven't had sight of those permissions because we were only made aware of your concern today.
Right.
And I haven't had time to look at the details of them, but presumably within that, there would have been conditions about when that work could take place. It does sound a bit bizarre that they were doing it during the nesting season. I can't tell you one way or the other whether that is within the permission, because I don't have that detail. I'm more than happy to discuss this with you offline and to put you in touch with the relevant officers, but I would also say, as a sort of general comment to anybody, that our enforcement team are punching way above their weight in terms of prosecutions and cases. They've got, I think it's 273 live cases at the moment. Okay. If all they want from the public is as much detail as possible, so, you know, proper location,
yeah, no, sure.
Video evidence, photograph evidence, you can then report it online yourself and they will be out within a day. You know, they are really hot on this and you know, very hot also on preserving trees, etc., because that's the reason why they have jobs with us.
Okay, right. Well, I think, may I respond? Sorry, did yeah, I mean, an issue therefore is where there is evidence of the permission having been given, because I can't find any evidence online of that permission.
Can I suggest that you go to the central point, which is if you have evidence of where you have most concern, then the team will have a look at that and they'll compare what you're saying with what they know they grant as permission. That's probably the most productive thing.
Okay, thank you. And may I send that to yourself? May I send that?
Please do.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Thank you. Next on our list, and needs no introduction, but we have to do it, I guess. Sir Bob Russell, our High Steward. Sir Bob. Okay, thank you. Perhaps I'll move on to the next then on that basis. Councillor Jocelyn Law. Welcome again, Jocelyn. Again, you know this place extraordinarily well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leader. Yes, so, I wanted to make a couple of points, bringing up, asking questions. As a Highwoods councillor and as a resident, I know how lucky we are to have plentiful open green spaces and Highwoods Country Park in our midst. And I also understand that maintaining and managing all, these open areas presents a real challenge, especially when we've had the levels of rainfall and growth that we've had this year. After following up on issues for residents, I would like to understand the routine maintenance and how that's managed, the management of the open spaces. And this is for things like cutting back, checking site safety, for example, and how, really to understand more how that is planned and implemented. And this is at places such as the former Mill Road Rugby ground site and also in Highwoods Country Park. And that's especially with things such as checks on trees along boundaries where there are residential properties. Thank you.
Councillor Goss.
Thank you. Of course, the quickest way to actually get these things answered is always to email me or any of the officers, which is obviously protocol normally, rather than have to wait for a council meeting. So you are at liberty to do that at any time. and I think I've said this before, but given that you've answered, because I think some of this stuff goes back weeks, but in terms of trees, there's already been an FOI request along this anyway, and we aim to inspect trees. They're set into different zones, but basically we aim to inspect zone 1 annually, zone 2 every other year, and zone 3 every 3 to 5 years of the individual trees within woodlands, and they're only recorded by exception. When a defect is found and the risk of failure could cause significant harm to persons or property, obviously immediate tree works will be actioned. Now, it's also worth noting that we carry out works on behalf of Essex County Council as well in some of the highway verges, and we get some budget for that, but not the full budget. So we're in conversation with Essex County Council about that going forwards. In terms of Mill Road, well, again, I had two residents actually contact me from Oxley Parker personally. One of them because they didn't actually get a response from somebody they went to. And the vegetation at the back of Oxley Parker is going to be cleared and put to grass, and that will be cleared shortly. And then the ongoing maintenance of that, we will take that forwards. Where that site has got caught, of course, would be in between it being Amphora trading and then coming back into Colchester, but we will deal with that. And then in terms of general inspections for countryside sites such as Highwoods, they receive a visit every 2 weeks where a patrol will be made. Usually different areas will be covered on each visit, and any issues noted and any maintenance that's required will take place. Of course, all this stuff is recorded. Every single tree in Colchester is plotted on our system, including trees that we remove, including trees that need to be replaced should funding become available as well. In terms of actual maintenance across Colchester, we cut all of our own areas 8 times a year between April to October, and we cut all highway verges on behalf of Essex County Council 6 times a year. It used to be 14 times a year, but we've cut that back to 6 because we are subsidising that significantly on behalf of Essex County Council. In terms of highway borders, we maintain those twice a year now, and again we are subsidising on behalf of Essex County Council, so we are in conversation with Essex about that going forwards, because like all councils, our budgets are reducing every year.
Jocelyn.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Yes, I was just going to come back. Yes, thank you. Obviously, I have followed up previously with officers, and it was just really sort of helpful to understand some of those different processes and why certain things may have arisen at particular sites. You know, I had spoken at previous cabinet meeting about issues with different sections of the former Big Club ground and sort of different levels of maintenance in different parts of it, and concern from residents where upkeep isn't maintained. It can sort of signal that there's a lack of interest in sort of keeping sort of pride in the community. You know, I know that, for example, at sections of that ground, there have been issues with sort of people trying to move onto it with caravans before, and I wondered perhaps whether sort of some sites being left is to sort of put people off. I just wasn't sure because some sites weren't cut back. In regards to the tree checks, you know, I just also I'd really like to say I really appreciate the hard work that all our staff put into maintaining sites, and you know, it is a really tough job. But just concerned that I know of trees that have fallen onto properties and caused substantial damage. You know, I'm concerned at the risk of safety to residents and also financial risk to the council. You know, given that we have many historic assets as well as natural assets, you know, there have been problems with Middleware. I'm just interested to know how, strategically as well, we think about sort of managing risk in terms of, you know, safety checks generally and public safety. So I was motivated sort of at that level as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, there's again a conflation of a number of issues there. In terms of the actual case that you mentioned in Highwoods, I'm aware of it because the resident actually contacted me directly, and within an hour we had somebody out there. Within an hour, to deal with it, and they were so thankful for the response that we gave them really quickly. So our team was on it immediately. So, you know, that is good feedback from the person. It's not nice when that happens to someone's property, but this council acted quickly and effectively and dealt with it, and the resident was really thankful. In terms of travellers, well, there's many sites they go on to. They were on I was actually meeting Colchester Rugby Club only a couple of weeks ago, and the travellers turned up the night before, and bollards had come out of the ground, and they were gone through the car park and were on the open space by the rugby club. So there are a number of sites that they go to. The big concrete bollards move mysteriously, and incursions happen. But I have to say, the team, the traveller unit at Essex, which we pay to help manage these situations, and the police, they work well as a team, and obviously we put public safety first as well when there are issues, and it isn't just Mill Road, it's many sites, and I don't think it's anything to do with maintenance. I think it's a case of incursions happen on all sorts of land. It's happened at Leisure World not that long ago, and other car parks. So I think Nuns Road from memory. So
Thank you. I hope that helps. And your wider point about health and safety is well made. You know, we have a set of responsibilities. I think what we've heard is that a structured approach and a responsiveness to identification of an issue is absolutely the right way to do it. And in terms of assets in the wider sense, the more usual sense of that term, because that's a key part of the work that the council is doing, as you know, just to turn over everything, understand where we're at, ensure we make adequate provisions. Thank you very much, Jocelyn. Sir Bob, we gave you a warm introduction, but you were just popped out. Please step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to conclude what I said at the meeting of Cabinet on the 10th of July, in the minutes you signed off, 870, I never did find out how much the saving on the grounds maintenance next to Jumbo was, so I tabled a Freedom of Information request, and the princely sum the council will save each year is £191. £191. While savings have to be made, I think the emphasis given on the savings as a justification, when it's £191, it doesn't really come to much, does it? And I think that was overstated. Under the new rules, we're required to put in the questions 24 hours minimum in advance. And here are my four, which has already been tabled. What was the budget for grounds maintenance for A, the financial year 2022-23, i.e. 2 years ago, and B, the current financial year? Second question, of these sums, how much was allocated to the company outsourced by the council to undertake grounds maintenance in each of these 2 financial years? Third question, in each of those financial years, how many ground staff were C, employed directly by the council, and D, by the outsourced company? And the fourth question, will the council bring the outsourced grounds maintenance contract back in-house when the current contract ends?
Thank you, Bob. Councillor Goss.
Thank you. There was a similar Freedom of Information request also put in asking the same questions or similar questions, and that, I believe, has been or is being responded to. What I can say against questions 1 and 2 is due to funds obviously being paid to an external contractor, and because of procurement in future, we're unable to actually say what the budget is because of...
That's ridiculous. This is public money.
So Bob, would you let him finish the answer, please? Thanks.
So, you know, you'll find that's what the FOI will probably say as well, because it's commercially confident. That's why. In terms of question 3, we don't employ separate grounds maintenance staff. They're all with ID Verdi directly. That's why the contract is outsourced currently. And the question is, would we decide to bring it back in-house? Well, if you remember, there have been agenda items previously where we have looked at potentially bringing the grounds maintenance back in-house. We extended the contract for a further 3 years. My personal view, and this is a personal view, is I would like to bring it back in-house, but that's my personal view, and one personal view and one person does not have that power or influence to make those things happen. It's a council decision, and there's governance and processes to follow. We are still in contract with ID Verdi for another 18 months, I believe. And as part of that process, we would look at the future, whether that would be to re-tender the contract, which is, is one option, to look at options of bringing it back in-house, or you could have a hybrid option of different suppliers. I don't have the answer to that, but that is a strategic piece of work that's ongoing as part of our ongoing services across the council. So that is the answer to the questions.
Sir Bob.
Chair, this is council taxpayers' money. I think they're entitled to know how much money has been allocated to the outsourced company to do work. I can't see why that information cannot be given. I think the people of Colchester are entitled to know that. I think they're entitled to know how much the reduction, and there has been a reduction, I am informed, has meant to a lowering of standards of grounds maintenance. I'm led to believe, and I can only say what I'm advised, that possibly up to 5 fewer frontline staff are now engaged in grounds maintenance. Surely that information can either be confirmed or denied or clarified by the council. This is an outsourced company doing work for the council. The council, you cabinet and councillors, you are here as representatives of the people. You're not their masters. You should be working for them. And I think they're entitled to know what their money is being spent on.
Thank you, Sir Bob. I'll ask officers to have a fresh look at that in the way that you've just expressed it. I would say there are, and you will understand this, there are rules around commercial confidentiality, and yet, you're right, we know we're spending public money. We do publish voluminous amounts of information about what we spend it on. The budget process is extraordinarily transparent, so maybe that we can give you some of the information that you've just requested. Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Goss. Councillor Martin Warnes. Martin, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question around a family-sized socially rented property that was acquired on a Section 106 agreement and given to a social housing provider when an estate in my ward was built. And this family-sized property has now been standing empty for 7 months. And the social landlord has told me they're considering selling the property because it's too expensive to repair. Now, officers within the council who I've been in contact with have also declined to get involved in helping to persuade the social landlord to change their mind, or as a backstop to look at whether the council could acquire the property so it remains a socially rented property available to homeless families through Colchester's housing register. Why then, when we are in the midst of a housing crisis, as we are in Colchester, does the council sit on its hands in relation to this matter? Colchester has hundreds of homeless applicants in temporary accommodation, and it's wrong that an appearance is given that we are unable to intervene. So at a time when this council is desperate for homes to let to those on our housing register, I call upon the portfolio holders for housing and planning to step in and do more to help save this property and to give hope to homeless families in need of housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. And I think your position would be the same of any of us as members in this room, that we saw something that was intended to come into, as you've described it, into becoming something available you'd want to see occupied. And our view would be, I'm sure, no different. I will ask the portfolio holder, and his absence is quasi-deputy Natalie Summers to pick up on whether or not there is anything more we can do. But and I'll come to my colleague here on the right. But just simply the facts that we know on your question is, as I think you've alluded to, that the extensive damage to the building and a judgment by that private owner, the fact that they've got a social obligation is they're still that private owner. In that sense, they're not directly answerable to us. But I absolutely get and understand, as we all will, why this matters. We too would like to see this back in use for affordable housing. And if we talk more widely, and I know you'll understand this, and we're helped by your colleagues like Sir Rippingell, who I think has a word to say later. We have a joint approach, which is to maximise the housing that we can access and the quality of it and raise its standards. So that bigger picture, sitting on our hands, absolutely not. On this one particular case, there may be a question we can pursue. I'll go to my colleagues first for a comment. First of all, Andrea.
Yeah, just to reiterate, I don't feel that we are sitting on our hands. I think that's an unfair comment. We have absolutely no control over privately owned social rented properties. If we did, we would get involved, but we have absolutely no remit to enforce anything. And as David has outlined, if a private owner thinks that the property is too expensive to refurbish, it's unlikely to be a prudent decision for us to invest taxpayers' money into that project. So we would rather turn it into projects where we can turn around houses and provide them for our residents. I think the other thing is that you have asked this question previously on the 30th of August and were given a response on the 3rd of September, which goes into more detail as to the situation. I'm really happy to forward that to you, but I don't see any point in elaborating on that answer because it's quite comprehensive.
Thank you very much, Natalie.
Yeah, no, I can only really echo what Andrea said there. If it's unviable for Peabody to bring back into use, if it's very likely it's going to be unviable for us as well. When we could use that money, we might spend on doing that property up to buy a new build that already adheres to all the social housing standards that are currently there today, because obviously we need to make sure these properties are up to standard, got all the right environmental protection, and yeah, it's one of those things. But I will ask them to take another look at it, just to make sure there's nothing we've missed and see what the exact cost might be. But yeah, at the moment it's likely to be viable for us as well.
Thank you, colleagues. Martin.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. My question wasn't one of enforcement, so I correct Councillor Luxford-Vaughan on that. My question was one of influence. And this council does have influence. And at a time where we are considering buybacks on sort of right to buy, looking at acquiring houses, yes, for reasons that I don't want to go into in order to protect data, a decision over the expense of repairing this property has been taken. But it seems wrong to me that, looking at this from a public perspective, that the ongoing generations of homeless people would be denied the opportunity to rent a property because of the actions of one irresponsible person. And it does seem to me that there is an opportunity, if we're in the game of buying homes anyway, to see what influence we have and what may be available in this particular situation. And I would ask you not to close your minds to that. Thank you.
Our minds aren't closed. We've already offered to follow through. The issue was not as much enforcement as just the practicalities of law, frankly, in terms of who owns what and what you can or can't do with the property of another, except in egregious circumstances. But we do hear you for the reasons you understand. The fact that this cabinet meeting is dominated, frankly, by some really significant housing papers and background work and a review of the housing revenue account, and the fact that we've got the chief exec of Colchester Borough Homes alongside. All these are signals of the focus cross-party, across all parties, on what matters most, which is having a home, frankly, for many people. So we're in the same place. This may or may not be practical, but we understand the sentiment, but our job, you will understand, is to be practical. But the point about influence and choice, we get that. Let's see where we can get to. Thank you. That concludes Have Your Say, to my knowledge. Do I have another speaker? Sir Bob has spoken. Oh, did you have another point, Sir Bob? I thought it was a point about a later item, as I understood it. That was my understanding too, Sir Bob. Thank you. That's fine, thank you. Okay, in which case we go to item 6, decisions reviewed by the scrutiny panel.
There are none, Chair.
In which case we go on to housing, already taking a good slice of time, and rightly so. And item 7.1, which is a strategic housing update paper. We have one visiting councillor, Councillor Rippingell. Would you like to come forward? She's on, well, come forward online, thank you.
Hello. just hiding in Zoom today because it's bedtime in our house. So I've come to speak on the temporary accommodation situation. I'd like to thank the leader for allowing me the time as shadow portfolio holder for housing to talk on the proposed scheme that the team have been working on. Alongside this, I'd like to thank Karen Lohman and the team at CBH for the additional work they've conducted in bringing around the sustainable option for a temporary accommodation. The use of bed and breakfast is financially and will continue to be unsustainable on our finances. Given the overspend this year alone, we must find proactive solutions to house some of our most vulnerable tenants. This is even before you consider the impact of those people's lives, well-being outcomes, the uncertainty and worry and time in temporary accommodation causes. I, like many, was unsure about that student accommodation would be suitable for these tenants, given the needs that present themselves, such as drug, drink, and mental health issues. So I resolved to visit that accommodation with Councillor Smith, and was surprised at the quality of the accommodation, with private bathrooms, in-room kitchenettes for single people and private apartments for families. But I was also surprised by the commitment of the on-site team to provide additional support for our residents. Given that the site manager herself had been in temporary accommodation throughout her life, it reassured me that there were people there who were compassionate and kind and could support our residents, as well as trying to find practical solutions for family life on site. You know, practical things such as how do you dry your washing? How do you provide safe places for children to play? And also feeding children healthy meals. These elements will provide a quality of life that B&B accommodation cannot supply. The accommodation will allow families to stay together, get to work and school, maintain their income, and more importantly, remain close to their support networks. It is in a community that has the right support in place already. The site will not be in isolation and near amenities. We have seen too many families impacted by lengthy stays in poor quality temporary accommodation, and I feel we're yet to see the long-term impact on health and wellbeing outcomes on those going through this route. We must proactively lead a change. We need to change how we source temporary accommodation and not allow private providers to profit from this ever-growing crisis. We must also look at the impact of pressure on our the number of people who present as homeless as having a mental well-being effect on our staff. Taking on this accommodation will allow them to provide targeted support, with the potential for a part-time housing officer being placed on site and alongside potential support from partner organisations. Is this a perfect solution? No, it isn't. The perfect solution is that we'd have enough council houses to be able to give everyone who presented with a need a sustainable permanent home. But it provides stability for residents to maintain their lives whilst we can find them or build them the right social homes, rather than push them into unsuitable permanent accommodation. I look forward to seeing how this project progresses and whether it can provide a sustainable blueprint for the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and that's really well said and very helpful, I think, for Mr. Short and the audience as a richer, fuller answer in terms of the focus on quality and practicality, underpinning a really cracking proposal, to be frank. Councillor Somers.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't have put it any better myself, Kaylee. I mean, that was really well said. As we know, we've got 364 people in temporary accommodation, 122 in bed and breakfasts, and as you say, people in bed and breakfast, they don't have the cooking and laundry facilities, so that adds extra costs. If they're not housed within Colchester itself, they're pushed out to further areas, then they've got the added costs of travelling in for work, trying to get their children to school, which adds to their debts, which can just keep spiralling. So having this temporary accommodation in Colchester for people is just, it would be an ideal sort of temporary solution to the housing crisis. And while we can help these people get back on their feet, they're housed within Colchester, they're local, they've got their support network still around them. And to me, it's just, I thoroughly recommend that we agree this proposal.
Thank you very much. The paper itself sets out two requests, one relating to the charging of affordable rent up to the level of local housing allowance rates, and the other one to extend the use of affordable rents to properties previously sold on the right to buy, so that when we purchase them, those are conditions that apply. So those are the recommendations. But Councillor Corey wants to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point, and when Alan Short came forward as well, I was thinking about adding to the comments he made that what has been set in train by government over a number of years is that we do not pay councils enough for the cost of this temporary accommodation. So what we are doing in this recommendation about affordable rents means we are going to closer to the local housing allowance sort of gap. So instead of costing millions as it is at the moment, it reduces that, asks people to pay a bit more, which often is supported through benefit. So actually it's in a way government getting a bit more out of central government to enable Colchester residents to have more housing available. So I think it's important to make that clear, that we are having to look at the slightly higher rate of affordable rent to be mainly paid and supported through benefit, but it enables us then to have a much more secure business plan for building more council homes or providing more council homes. And I just wanted to make that point clear. The negative point is we haven't been given enough over time. We are therefore having to change slightly the way we do it, and it is a way that enables us and our residents, hopefully, to have a more secure home.
Thank you. Colleagues, anything else from any other colleague on this? If not, I think we've had a rounded conversation helped by Kaylee's introduction for us. I know how well she works with the portfolio holder, can't be here tonight, and how much he works at ensuring across all parties there's an understanding what we're doing. That's absolutely the best way to work. So back to the recommendations again. Thank you, Mark. There are two to agree to charge affordable rents on buyback properties, so at 80% of the market rent is capped, and to agree in principle to lease private sector student accommodation. And we heard absolutely that that's a good thing for people, as well as, we hope, some relief for a much pressed budget. Are we agreed?
Very much so, yes.
Thank you very much indeed. In which case we go on to the next paper, which curiously is 7.2. This is a Housing State of the Nation update, and I'll go to Councillor Somers to give a few words.
Yes, so this quarterly social housing update, it relates to various topics, that the housing elements that came in the King's speech, building the homes we need, and various others. Obviously, we've got a new government, so it's been great to hear some of the new things that the government is planning on bringing in with regard to housing, such as the banning Section 21 and the leasehold arrangements. So there's lots of positive stuff in there for Colchester. Obviously, yes, as always, we would like to see an uplift in the amount we get for social housing and in the local housing allowance to help with rent. But overall, I believe it's a very positive move forward from the government.
Thank you. Colleagues, any other observations that you would like to draw out on this comprehensive report? Okay. Oh, we ought to just acknowledge that, of course, there's some tough stuff in there. Amongst it, I draw out homelessness, which we have talked on tonight, which is a terrible experience for those involved, and the numbers are continuing to grow, dozens upward in just a few months, heading to the upper 300s at the current rate. And what we should remember that includes hundreds of children who will be living in temporary accommodation, and a number of them living in bed and breakfast. So if we ever want, I know we don't need it, incentive to get on and do the best we can with the circumstances we've got to help drive government policy where we're able to, help influence and shape it, which is what we're trying to do, work with our neighbours. And that alone will be reason. But we ought to just touch on the Housing Ombudsman's service. So regulation is also rising, and so the amount of money we will need, and this is the right thing to do in many respects, to invest is going upward. The degree of challenge and the expectations from our tenants is going upwards as well. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Somers, the policy direction is the right way. We need to get help to the bottom line to manage all those pressures, but this paper does I think provides a very readable digest of where we're at, and I thank Philip Sullivan, who's in the audience, and his colleagues Karen Lohman and others for helping pull this together with the portfolio holder. We are the better for having that very readable, succinct summary, and it's a reminder to us of the importance of understanding our context when, at least in the beginning of a new government, you've got some opportunities to influence it. All right, colleagues, this is for noting. Are we content? Yes. Thank you. In which case we go on to item 7.3, which is the motion referred from the last full council. We had a spirited conversation across the chamber. We agreed on this, I think unanimously, as I recall. And under item 7.3, we have the motion and what we said we would call upon government to do. Much of this has been touched on. So everything from renters reform, working with government and local government on investment and help to meet the demands and costs of the risks of homelessness, through to right to buy. That we can't have a Colchester moratorium, but we can absolutely press with others like the Local Government Association for improvement arrangements, and indeed there's been a promise that some of that will come through, so more flexibilities on the use of receipts. So, colleagues, we've been called upon to act. I would demonstrate that, I would say that we have, but I go to Councillor Corey.
Thank you. Being one of those who helped contribute to this motion, and the Liberal Democrats putting it forward, it shows, based on the last two reports, how we want to take action. And we need government support. We've just heard how there's some steps in the right direction, but there needs to be some radical steps. Number one, government needs to support local government, because local government deliver housing. And at the moment, the grants that come to local government do not support us to go and build council homes. It does not support us to acquire enough council homes. As someone who cares passionately about this issue, we need to go further, and this motion helps us do it. But as someone who also runs the finances or oversees those for Colchester, year on year, we are taking on more and more increased cost, about £1 million each year, which is adding up to our base budget, which means we struggle to afford many other services. This is one of the most fundamental services, so we absolutely pay what we need to house our people. But we need radical steps, such as a moratorium on right to buy, because there has been a deforestation of council homes in the thousands across Colchester and hundreds of thousands across the country. We need to take different approaches, and it can't just be providing private accommodation and developers building more. I'm sure this government is now receiving lots of support from the developers who used to fund money towards the previous government. But we need to take more radical steps than simply house building as well. So I think this motion explains all the steps we need to take. Working with the all-party parliamentary group is absolutely the way we need to go. But if we can have any movement on right to buy, I absolutely understand the principle of right to buy, but the principle of owning your own home compared to having a roof over your head, I feel the British public want to see people housed, want to see people homed, and I would love to see if the Labour government are brave enough to take this on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. Anything else from colleagues? Councillor Somers.
Just echo what Councillor Corey said there. As I say, many of the things that were born in this motion, we have seen obviously come in with a renters reform bill being resurrected with a Section 21 ban. And when this very motion was read out at council, obviously we had a visit from Colchester resident Simon Collis, who passionately described his own efforts to prevent his own family from becoming homeless and the crisis it spiraled them into. And, you know, if we could stop people getting to that stage by carrying out some of the things included in this motion, then yeah, it can only be a positive thing. When it costs upwards of £150 a night sometimes to put people up in bed and breakfasts, you know, it's not sustainable. So we do need that extra funding from government to help us just try and get a grip on this, because I say it's unsustainable with the costs at the moment.
Thank you very much. Right, colleagues, I suggest we treat item 7.3 as our checklist of those issues that we have and will pursue. And on that basis, given the last two items and the comments from you all, I would say that we are acting as full council have requested us, but we'll bear in mind their injunction to us to act in this way. Agreed? Agreed. Please.
Chair, I just wondered if, in view of what you said earlier about the Colchester moratorium, you wanted to review the wording at E, which obviously calls for us to call for a Colchester moratorium.
Let's do that. Thank you. Such a simple amendment.
I think the Chamber also made that remark, so we're not changing the motion drastically. And I think it's probably the wording I suggested to you, Leader, in the first place, but we got there in the end.
It's always good to be corrected late in the day, better than never. Thank you, Richard, for reminding us of this. This is obviously a pursuit, so what we secure from the pursuit we'll see, but the first two items do suggest real progress and some possibility and more. Thank you all very much indeed, in which case we go to item 1, 8.1, I beg your pardon, which is the updated medium-term financial forecast. I have two visiting councillors, as ever, very welcome to come forward. Councillor Willits and Councillor Harris. If Dennis, you'd like to come forward first, please. Thanks. I know you know the routine really well.
Thank you, Leader. One of the central planks of the MTFF is establishing a robust financial position by maximising the generation of commercial income for the council, because we know commercial income can then be applied to frontline services, to the cutting of the grass, all the other things, cleaning of the town centre, emptying the bins, and it really is a fundamental point of the budget strategy, as you have said on many occasions, Leader. However, when I look through the MTFF update, there is only one area where there is significant mention of commercial services and commercial income, and that is on page 45, where I note that there's a comment that the embedded assumption on income growth from Turnstone is 100,000 this year, and of course Turnstone, I guess, is just a code word for the Northern Gateway project. As I'm sure you know, Leader, there has been action in the High Court this week on this very matter on 28th of August, where Cineworld were asking for approval to their restructuring programme. And I'm sure it must have crossed your mind with that going on, whether it is wise to continue with the involvement of Cineworld. Listening to or reading the transcriptions of those court case, it would appear that what is being asked for is that rather than money generated by our commercial services from Cineworld going into our frontline services, it's more likely to go to subsidising hedge funds in the Cayman Islands if Cineworld has its grant of cramming down the rents they have to pay, having already negotiated a much larger position in the first place. And I think most residents of the city really want us as a council to provide the essential public services, which we've already mentioned, not engage in high-stake poker games with Cayman Islands cinema owners, which I guess is what's going to happen as this project moves forward. And in the convening hearing in the High Court, our agreement with Cineworld was down in Class D, leases that might be discarded, or general creditors, and it may well be that Cineworld walk away first, leaving MTFF with a bit of a monumental problem in terms of its reliance on commercial income generation. So I asked Leader, can you make a statement on the impact of the Cineworld problem with or without Cineworld in the Northern Gateway project and its impact on the MTFF, because from the calculations I see, it is likely to be quite significant on the future robustness of the MTFF and the annual budgets in the next 2 years.
Thank you very much. And your interest in all matters financial, and I know you're here for risk as well, so all these items are linked, is really appreciated, Councillor Willetts. So to your specific point, well, there's two really. One, in terms of commercial income and what makes it up, that clearly is an important element of the overall financial viability of the council. The Fit for the Future focus that you know we have, and the programme we have, which we're rolling through, and which will be a lot more yet, does set out how we will deliver on a 25% balance of raised income and reduced cost equivalent to a quarter of the budget. And commercial income and sorting out our commercial companies is part of that, if you like, organisational restructuring that some of us aren't quite attracted to, because getting the basics, getting the essentials right is what gives us the right future. So that there's a point to take away for us, I think, about how much we are saying at this point. We certainly will be saying more on the general nature of commercial income so that we can bring forward and give confidence in our restructured companies, because the future does matter. They do some things both in service and in income generation that are really valuable for the reasons you described, that matters to service provision. On the specifics of Cineworld, we are not going to talk about that, and you understand why here in open session. We have got contractual and legal arrangements with them. They were complex now, and the restructuring to which you alluded, which is a public issue clearly, is something that's going to take time to work through. We are making sure that cross-party, we're keeping some colleagues involved, and I'm sure that they'll share what they feel able to share as we go. We will make sure all members are aware of that. There will be a time when specifically we can say more to the public other than to acknowledge that there is a challenge with one of the providers of entertainment services at Northern Gateway. But I would just say this, It's an attractive site. It's got things opening now, more to come. My personal view, and I've heard it from others too across parties, every reason if we manage ourselves through this well, that this location will still work really well, both as something that people will want to go to, that residents will want to visit, that's good for them and good for the city and in terms of income. But we acknowledge there is a short-term challenge. We'll have to work our way through that. We will share that when it's known. We can't talk to that now. Thank you.
My comment to that, Chairman, this is an issue which is being discussed in the national press, all the way down to the local gazette. It's a topical matter, and people think we're a bit like Dumbos if we as a council say, well, we've got no comment, we have no expression of opinion on this matter. And I just fear that this is, that our reputation may get tarnished if we're not able to explain in terms which doesn't compromise our commercial position, but there should be some sort of outline available in the press rather than having all the speculation in the press, on social media about what is happening. I understand why there is a reticence to give explicit details, but in the absence of any information, the council just going sort of clamming up on this issue, it does cause concern to our residents.
I understand that completely, and so I can say some assurance. We issued a press release, I think this was probably a week ago, I can't say exactly what day, and that says, that absolutely acknowledges the issues and the fact that we have to work our way through it, and we've used measured language in doing so for the reasons you'll understand. And there will be more to follow, but our hands up for the public. They know, and we know, there's a challenge at that site with that provider. They will expect us to address it. That's what we're going to do, and we'll keep you in touch. Thank you. Mark is...
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think you said it quite well at the end, quite succinctly there. I was quoted on the press release. It has gone out, and we ensured we spoke with all group leaders on that, because this is a cross-party issue. Not only has it been through cross-party development, this whole project, but also we are working, as I'm sure you know, with a number of members from each group to keep everyone updated as much as possible on all of the information, the confidential items, and then we provide assurance to members through updates as well where we can. But we are absolutely on this issue. It does concern us. It is commercially sensitive, but we are doing everything we can. So just to reassure the public, it is a great site, as David said. We are on top of all of the actions that are being taken by Cineworld. We are trying to do our best to prepare and to look at what next steps are with Cineworld and the future of that site. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Thank you, Martin. Mark, that's really helped. Martin as well. Always give him praise when you can, he likes it. All right, okay, thank you very much indeed. In which case, Mark Corey, would you like to pick up? Oh, we've got Dave Harris as well. Sorry, Dave, please come forward, thank you. I got so used to seeing Dennis there, I just couldn't move away.
Good evening, Leader. Good evening, Cabinet. Financial matters, just two very brief issues that I just want to raise with you. One has already been talked about by my colleague Jocelyn Law on the Ida Verde contract, which the Portfolio Holder for Waste Martin Goss has spoke about. But I want to tease a bit more and just back what Councillor Law said, and perhaps some of the words that Martin said as well, and that is our reputational issue for this council on we having loads and loads of people making complaints through the early part of the spring, late spring and early summer. That did us no good whatsoever. We have to do better, and I support some of the words that have said about reviewing those contracts, etc., and where the money comes from. But we've got to do better, otherwise our reputation will be tarnished. The second issue I want to raise with you, and it's quite a one that came up at G&A, the Governance and Audit Committee, and the leader will know I raised it with him before as well, and that is that as a patient forum member of the Abbeyfield Surgery, they lack car parking in that area. The C3 Church on Eaps Road also lacks car parking, and we have in our budget quite a substantial sum of money for a play park there. All I wanted to say to you, and I've said this to you before, Leader, several months ago, whether that's the right thing to do, whether the right thing now is to engage with the community, with the doctor surgeries, with the chemists, with the C3 Church and the residents in that complete area there, to say whether we're allowed to re-divert that money. We haven't even started to build that play park. 10 years ago, when that money was put in that pot, it would have been a really good play park. What money now gives us remains to be seen, but we haven't put a spade in the ground at all, although we have promised a couple of times to do that. Should we, and this is a question for the Cabinet to consider, go back to see whether we're allowed, first of all, to re-divert that money into something else, car parking, extra facilities in that area to support the community, or whether even residents want that? I make no opinion one way or the other. I think it would be up for the council and for the councillors of that area and for the residents to decide whether they want the play park after the 10 years that's gone under the water under the bridge. G&A had this come up every time on the audit. We looked at it, and it's a substantial sum of money that we need to think about. Rest my case, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave. As ever, I'll ask Councillor Goss-Martin if you pick up the first point, and then I'll ask Pam, who is very aware of this, to address the second. Thank you.
Yeah, so I need to be really, really clear so that there's no misapprehension about responsibilities. We cut the majority of Colchester on behalf of Essex County Council. They are only interested in cutting their own land twice a year. We cut it 6 times a year, and therefore the Colchester Council budget is subsidising 4 of those cuts a year. I'm not even convinced the money that we get from Essex even covers the 2 cuts, but legally what they're happy to pay for. We've had conversations to say you need to cough up more money. I was on a meeting last Thursday, so I was on a day out in Aldeburgh with Essex officers about a whole raft of issues, and that was one of them, and we've been talking to them for months. We cut our own land 8 times a year, and that will continue because I think that's the minimum that we need to cut it. If we handed the land back to Essex, which we are potentially able to do, if Essex continue to allow us to increase our own overdraft rather than their own, it's all taxpayers' money, whichever way you look at it, whether it's our council or Essex. The bottom line is if we hand that back to Essex, the reputation will be Essex because they will only cut it twice a year, and they will probably cut or deal with other verges even less than we do. So, and the amount that we subsidise it by is not a few quid. I can tell you that for a fact without giving away any commercial confidence in terms of what we pay for it. But I just wanted to be really clear on that. I absolutely agree with you on reputation because I've never been happy cutting these services, but at the end of the day we have budgets to meet and obligations to meet, and we are still cutting Essex's land and dealing with Essex plants in verges at our own cost to a significant amount of money, which you could argue should go into other frontline services. That's the argument. So I just wanted to be really clear. I agree with you, but ultimately the responsibility sits with Essex, as it does for every other council. And I know that some other councils have gone back to cutting that land twice a year or just giving it back to Essex. So we are actually doing more than some of our Essex councils in other towns and cities.
Before I go to the Chief Exec, thank you, Martin. There's probably just one thing I ought to add, Dave, which might pick up some of the point as well, which is that we know the public watch some particular spaces in particular, don't they? So our fabulous gardens around the castle, rose beds here, there and everywhere. There's an absolute limit to what we can do, but I think there is something for us operationally to check whether we are ensuring that the priorities we have are fully understood by those who are acting for us, is how I would choose to put it. all right, so that we do pick up on that a bit faster. I should add, we do have some wonderful displays, don't we? We know we have to have a balance about this, but some of them also get neglected. So up and down this high street there are, and I've talked a bit about this, there are places that they have responsibility for, done really well, and others that need a bit more care. So I think there is some learning for us collectively to pick up before the next, if you like, spring season takes. So I hope that is, in a rounded way, your point, and I'll go to Chief Exec Pam.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Councillor Harris. If I may just have a word on the reputational issue as well. As you were talking and others were responding, I was thinking about the fact that this type of conversation is probably being replicated up and down the country in every local authority we can think of. And the reason for that is that there is an inherent imbalance between the demands on local government and the expectations of residents and the amount of available budgets. You have heard from the previous conversations that we are very focused on lots of areas, one of them being housing and the provision of housing for the most vulnerable. And that strand around vulnerability runs through everything we're trying to achieve as a council and is reflected in the refreshed strategic priorities. So I make that point because I too am worried about reputation and whether we will be able to ever balance that demand from the general public, the council taxpayers, for standards that are higher than we can now deliver. But to the very specific point about the play park, I probably know more about this than I should, and that's because I know from previous professional connections the practice manager at the Abbey Surgery, so she's used me as a contact point. And I can tell you, going back now probably 6 or 7 weeks ago, that I had confirmation from the head of the greening team that we were now ready to commence this play park. Now, it's been coming for a very, very long time. What I don't know are all the reasons why it's been delayed for so long. But I suspect there are some residents who can't wait for that to happen because it meets a very specific need for them and their families. And it doesn't resolve what I know is a growing problem around car parking. I think that's another example of what I've just said, competing demands. I suspect, but don't know, therefore I will check, there are some conditions in the Section 106 funding that require a play park to be constructed. However, ultimately the decision as to whether we want to pull back at this very late stage is a political decision. I suspect, I'm fairly confident in saying contracts have already been issued, but I'd rather be 100% confident, so I'll come back to let you know. Thank you.
Councillor Goss.
As you'd expect, I do know about this subject. This play park has already been designed, tendered, and I do believe that a start date is imminent because I've been chasing it up, and we've also ensured that accessibility has been part of that conversation as well, given the previous conversations on accessibility. It is tied into a Section 106 agreement, as far as I'm aware, with Taylor Wimpey. They gave a significant amount of money and are expecting a play park to be built, because in fact even they've been chasing me about it, because I do speak to Mike Newis at Taylor Wimpey quite often about adoptions and other issues, and I'm taking some of those forwards. The doctor's surgery has also reached out to me personally about car parking, and I've been quite clear that that land is going to be a playground because that's what it was designated for and that's what the funding is for. And I absolutely do get that parking in that area is at a premium. I've visited the C3 church a number of times, etc. But what I would say is where the doctor's surgery has expanded for good reason, it's not that for the council to provide car parking. Absolutely not to give away green space for car parking. I think that would be heinous. We don't have enough open spaces, play parks, etc. as it is. So that play park is going ahead. It's a project on the list that I review quite often and is slated and tied in. So I don't think we'll be changing that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I'll be glad to see the play park start. I mean, it's been a long time coming. So, you know, let's get it sorted. Just to salute very much on the previous item about the greening, there was a lot of volunteers out there that cut back areas that do culture and bloom, for example, in the high street here, etc. The bid team. So we'd salute the volunteers to actually supplement the work the council does. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for raising the issue. I'm glad at last we've got some better news for you and your residents. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Martin and Pam. Right, as we go to Councillor Corey, having digested that and more.
Ironically, Leader, we're a bit more in the weeds with some of those points, but just to raise it up to the headlines of this report, this is an update to the reports we had outlining the budget strategy and outlining the medium-term financial forecast back in February. So in this report, it shows the foundations for next year's budget and the years running up to 29-30, so 2029-2030. It explains the deficit we're looking at next year, but actually with the Fit for the Future programme kicking in and reducing costs, we actually see a surplus in the following year, 2026-27. So it shows the work we are doing as an organisation is working, and the predictions we are making see us come into a positive situation in 2026. But unfortunately, due to all of the explanations today around the costs on local government, the budget forecast continues then to show deficits into the future. So we are ensuring that we look at all of the spend that is going forward. One of the answers to Councillor Willits as well is, yes, there are other commercial income opportunities. They are baked into the budget, they're baked into service costs, service income, but they're not featured in here in specifics because this is a highlight report in a much sort of high level detail. So we are reducing certain costs, we are increasing income where possible to balance the books as best as we can, and the numbers featured in the report I believe are manageable over the years, and we also have been consistent with our reserves, ensuring we do not deplete our reserves at all. We continue to put back into the reserves where we can, and we will use them to smooth during some of these difficult times or difficult costs that we are seeing. So we also have employee costs that we have to understand, the impacts of inflation across the economy, which have caused things like insurance to increase, which actually also impacts on the other reports as well that we'll come to. So the temporary accommodation we talked about earlier, all of these are adding up, and we need to be absolutely aware of these cost increases. One thing that we are also doing is we're reviewing, and this is where the report divides into the general fund and the housing revenue account. We are also going through a review of the business plan of the housing revenue account, which in order to do it correctly and in depth will take longer than the time we have to budget for the next year. But what we're going to do, Leader, and that's something that all of us as Cabinet have said, is we need to look at the interim understanding of the review to make modifications to the future plans, because it has been a discussion at full council. We have talked about borrowing and large amounts of borrowing in the housing area. We have to, like we have with the capital programme, which I'll speak to shortly, we have to be very careful due to costs of borrowing, due to the interest rate increases we've seen over the last few years, means that we have to have a look at modifying some of those plans. So we will do that, and we will bake that into the budget process over the coming months. I think that's a roundup as best as I can. Leader, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any extra comments or questions from colleagues? Okay, then, thank you very much, Councillor Corey Mark. There's a huge amount of work from the team behind here. So I know that you do this all the time. So on this occasion, it'll be my pleasure to thank our finance team. They're bringing forward the cycle, which perhaps a point we want to enforce again. This is to give visibility to the public and to fellow members, and to start the conversation with less of the closing of the year budget stress, and to allow the key facts to be sort of seen, tested and challenged next week or so through scrutiny on the 17th, I think it is. And then in November, members have a further opportunity, and we have a Leaders alumni, so we pulled together those of us who've been in that role and position of responsibility to give a more independent, further independent test and challenge. So an open process, lots of information that really matters that should help those who want to understand what's happening, and you pulled out some really specific and helpful points. So members, the recommended decisions are that we note the contents of the report, this is 2.1, relating to the general fund and housing revenue account. We discuss and agree any actions, including the assumptions as set out. Unless there is, and there hasn't been in prior discussion, challenge them, I'm assuming that we are content. I think we should note two things. First of all, that we should bring out that the position of our commercial companies and the income they generate, that's worth an extra highlight at the right time. And that particularly important point, Councillor Crawley, that is in the paper around the HRA, that given that the HRA viability review is going to go through the whole of this budget year, we will not have the full results of that, so we will make an interim judgment about what's appropriate for borrowing and otherwise for the needs of the HRA next year. So there will be a revision there, so I'd like us to record that. So we will bring out commercial picture more clearly, and we will be adjusting the HRA elements of the borrowing and papers that we see before us. But I think it's a really helpful forward step. Are we content? Yes. Thank you very much indeed. Mark, over to you. 8.2, capital programme.
Thank you. We do have Councillor Pearson, who I'm happy for him to come forward first.
Please do, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader and Cabinet. Just before I start making my point around this item, I would just say to Councillor Willits that next week Governance and Audit Committee has an item on it for the Treasury Statement Update. So he's welcome to come along and review that. I would also just add that the leader of his group was a party to a very detailed confidential discussion about Northern Gateway at the previous meeting of GNA. And I'm sure if he hasn't already done so, he'll be able to pick up anything he wants from his leader. I come to you about this item because, one, I wanted to say I'm pleased that we're finally getting through the capital review. It's taken a little bit longer than I would have wished, but nevertheless, we're getting through it. But I also come to you tonight as a ward councillor. As you are aware, I am a Labour councillor for Beerchurch Ward, have been for over 10 years now. And in that decade, I've seen millions of pounds spent on capital projects around the city, including Stanway, Mile End, Castle and other parts, many of which I don't believe have the same needs that my ward and the ward of Councillors Harris and Warnes actually have. I acknowledge the need to spend money in Grinstead as the most deprived part of the city, but I would argue that on the aggregate of indices, although there are parts of other wards, including St Anne's and St John's, Old Hythe and Heath, even part of Lexton and Prettygate, that have particular areas of deprivation, but on the aggregate of those indices, my ward probably rates second for deprivation across the city. And yet, I haven't seen a penny spent on capital in that decade in Beerchurch. So I come to you tonight to ask you, when you're reviewing the capital programme, to consider as a priority a community centre provision for Beerchurch. I and my fellow councillors have suggested a proposal. There is already a site in the middle of Monkwick Estate. It's owned by the Catholic Church. However, it has very limited use by the Catholic Church, and I'm sure if we could come up with a package, I'm not suggesting it all has to be Colchester City money, but I'm sure if we could find a way in which we could draw in money from elsewhere, we might be able to find a solution to making full use of that site and using it as a community focal point. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Chris. I'll go to Councillor Corey as he oversees for us the capital programme, although of course these things come past you in your independent role as Chair of Governance and Audit amongst others. Look, I mean, to the point, of course, we should as a council be taking account, I think we do, and more certainly even in my short time here than we once might have done, where deprivation and where challenge lies. And this is, I'll get to directly to your point, but the context we have to acknowledge. So you will know that deprivation affects where resources head. They're not capital. It does impact who gets seen, who gets help. You will know that this council's made a priority. And whilst we were in coalition formally, and I'd like to think in whatever is the informal understanding between us now, to ensure that we help people who are in need in lots of ways to extract from the government system, such as it is, all the help and support they can get. You know, hundreds of people, I don't know, it's thousands, over the course of the year, get helped in their difficult personal circumstances. We work with our Health Alliance colleagues to ensure that the need is more effectively addressed, not effective enough in my view, but more effectively addressed. That's where the longer term advantages and response to neglect of many years or the deprivation of many years is going to come from, with respect, not just capital investments, but it is a combination. And we ought to just acknowledge your reference to the Heart of Grinstead project. You know, this has a very significant impact and influence on the community, we believe, working with partners. I think, I hear that we now have local acceptance. We're giving ward councils a real voice here. I think that's a sensible thing to do. And I, overseeing this from a distance, would only say what I've said before and have to you. Half of the town deal monies flows that way and is helping generate other income. That's not an exact model for Beerchurch, is it? But the point is understood that sometimes capital investment can have a place. So what I would do is, having said that contextual piece, which you would say if you were here, but let's not lose sight of that, but to your specific request, let's do what you would and all members should expect. Let's go and look at the facts of where we're at, using out the sources we've got in our communities team, go and have a look at what the choices are without here in this place openly saying it's this building or it's not that building. The impact or the possibility of an impact of investment, I accept the principle, but we need to have a thoughtful conversation offline about what's the best way to do that if and when we can. I hope that answers the heart of your question, but Mark, I'm sorry, you agree. We agreed on trying to cover that. Would you like to talk about specifics? Anything else you'd like to add from a capital programme perspective?
Yeah, I think from your point there, Leader, the communities team is the place to go. I think a review across the borough and city area is done fairly often, but it's something we need to go back to. It's something that I know you will know, ward councillors, we have community enabling officers who come to us and look at where 106 money could be allocated in the future. And I wanted to just touch on that. You mentioned places like Stanway and Mile End. In those examples, vast contributions have been through 106 money. So from planning gain, most of those community centres have been paid for in the vast majority through planning money. So it depends, and in the last 10 years, I know before that, but in the last 10 years, I don't think Beerchurch has had significant planning gain to deliver perhaps enough to contribute towards a community centre. So on one hand, of course, when housing comes to communities, some people don't always want housing, but it does bring things such as planning contributions to community facilities. And in Wivenhoe, for example, Taylor Wimpey development, we're working and have worked closely with the town council to get contributions towards a community centre. Not enough to provide one, but I may also be asking myself for contributions towards a community centre in the future. But also we are working with the council to look into a community asset transfer of Colchester land to Wivenhoe Town Council to enable the project to happen. So the project you're talking about is something that I have affinity to that kind of way forward. I know there's been a project with the Scouts taking council land, so it's not always in Beerchurch. It's not always clear through pounds and pennies being spent, but things do happen with the transfer of land or leasing of land to enable community buildings to happen. So the end of it really, as David said, is we can look into this and review. I think you're absolutely right as a council that we focus on areas of deprivation. We need to provide things like play parks. We need to provide community centres. That is absolutely our goal, and supported by, I'm sure, yourselves in the Labour Party and the Green Party, who help support this minority administration of Liberal Democrats who believe in ensuring inequalities are reduced and quality of life is increased. And it's about community centres, hubs, whether physical or not, and working together. So I can commit to you that, as David has said, we will review and see what is possible, and we will work with partners as well to see what is possible, as you've identified. But I can go to the report. I don't know if you wanted to give Chris a short response.
Chris, did you want to come back on that?
Thank you, Leader. Just very quickly, I'm not expecting a replication of what's happened in Grinstead, but I think that what has happened in Grinstead shows us what can be done in areas of greatest need. And when I look at my own ward, I just feel that we have been left out. I hear what you say about the Scout land, but we're talking about a very small plot of land with very limited use. What we know is that provision of a community centre act as a focal point for engaging the wider community and also bringing in investment into a particular area. And that's all I'm asking for, that the administration looks very closely at Beerchurch, because I feel, and I believe that my fellow ward councillors feel, that Beerchurch has been left out for too long now.
Well, thank you. Let's close off on a positive. Now, you've had a couple of eloquent responses which come down to yes. The conclusion of which, will be a process, won't it? We ought to just say out loud, because it is a truth, that of course we form our priorities as a council, and we've not been deaf to, I hope we haven't been deaf, certainly not in my time, to approaches from members from any party, from any part of the city. But what we hear you doing, with the support of your fellow ward members, is saying, for whatever the reasons, and that's the point I'm making, it's collective responsibility where our priorities are. You'd like us with you, with others, to try and see if we can make this a priority. And the answer is, yes, we will look at that seriously and together. Thank you very much, Chris, and I'll hand back to Mark.
Thank you, David. So this report follows on from the last report, which is another update on where we were last when we updated in February to now, how certain costs have increased when we're looking at financing the capital programme, but also where perhaps we have reduced some of our plans and where new costs have come into the programme. So looking at things such as the ICT costs going forward. I mentioned insurance premium costs previously. Things we have to budget for when we're talking about large costs that we have to account for. Also, where we're looking at our asset management and looking at investment into our, whether it be our commercial properties that we lease out to businesses, or even our assets that are historic, and keeping those looked after and up to date. We need to account for that in the capital programme. So this is simply an update on the capital programme to say where we believe there may be increases in expenditure needed and where we may reduce expenditure because of the capital financing costs over time. So overall, Leader, I would say that there are increased pressures we have to identify due to the economy, inflation and service costs, as I've talked about before. Also ways in which we can reduce cost by perhaps not going forward with certain projects.
Thank you very much indeed. Colleagues, before we close on this item, anything from anybody else? In which case, we should go to the recommended decision, which is summarily, as it's set out in 2.1 and 2.2, note the contents of the report, discuss and agree the actions required. We are content with what's set out here, as I understand it. I think the only two things we would note formally for the record. The first is that this may not have an immediate impact upon the capital budget, but as an item of inquiry, we will look at the church. And the second one, a very personal one, which I continue to raise, is the effectiveness of our management of capital really matters. So we must continue to look at the quality of our project management, our estimating and our delivery. So that's something that we're doing alongside this, so that when we come to full council next year, we have confidence that will have been tested and shared with other members about the sums of money that we're asking be committed against what year for what project, right? So it's an quality of project management and estimating point I ask that we bring out. Do we agree?
Agreed.
All right, thank you very much. That gets through items 8, which are fabulous, and don't they matter? Money drives everything. I'm conscious of time. We're up to item 9 next, and we should really stop at 7:30. My suggestion is, it's quite a long way to go, that we have a short 10-minute break. We're back here at 10:02, so stretch your leg and whatever else anyone needs to do. Back at 10:02 to pick up the balance of the agenda. We made good progress, more to do. Thank you very much. We're just past the time that we said we would start. Item 9.1, ICT and transformation. But before we do so, and I see food's being brought in for us. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Corey. Excellent. Sharing will start immediately. I just want to acknowledge that Councillor Luxford-Vaughan had an accident on the way in, say it plain, I'm sure she will. That's not great. Staff member is going to have to go off and sort that, so she's left us. I thank her for her time. We're still current and we'll continue with the business at hand. This item 9.1 is in the portfolio of Councillor Jay. I understand we've got the lead officer here also. So I'll pass over to you, Alison, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, do you want to come in?
I beg your pardon. We've also got Councillor Willett. So perhaps actually, Dennis, would you mind, Mel, if I ask Councillor Willett to come forward and then you could pick up any points that he raises? Would you? All right, then we'll go. Then I love the get up, get down. And Mel, this is after a period of enforced inactivity sitting at the end of the room. It's all good, isn't it? So, Mel, if you go through and then we'll ask Dennis to come forward and Alison, Councillor Jay will pick up after that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, Councillors, Chief Executive. Thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to talk to you about the paper we've presented. In all of our minds is customer experience. It's absolutely critical to our community wellbeing and the reputation of our council and the efficient delivery of our services. In February, as part of Fit for the Future portfolio, we set out a very clear commitment to improve our customer experience in the context of our digital customer programme. The same commitment has taken place in one of our partnership councils, Epping Forest District. And the projects set out in that programme are website, customer platform, and also importantly, customer experience. So in the context of our proposed shared corporate services, what I'm asking today is an agreement to a very different approach, one where we look to align our technology decisions, look to align the delivery of those technologies across our two councils. By doing so, we look to leverage benefits of working together. Our buying power is that much greater. Our delivery resources can be leveraged and benefit from a greater skill set, diversity, and the resources to deliver come together more effectively. At Colchester City Council specifically, we have some pressing needs as well to deal with some of our current technologies. We need to move our website onto a more specialist website platform than we currently have. We've got considerable issues, many of which I hear from you all around the table fairly regularly. We also need to deliver services that are accessible, something very close to my heart and very close to many of you, I know. So this paper today sets out the journey to a more sustainable future, and one where we benefit from leveraging our partnership work in the context of our North Essex Council's paper that you see later today. I also would like to just mention and acknowledge and thank Councillor Jay for being part of our shared briefings with Epping Forest District Council and look forward to continuing that work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mel. Perhaps you'd like to take a seat for this item, and just in case that is helpful later, Alison. We did say Dennis, didn't we? Well, let's do it that way round, shall we? Come, Dennis, please come forward. We reserve the right to change our mind when you're halfway here.
All items coming to Cabinet are important, but there are some where you throw your hat in the air and say, yippee, at last, we're hearing the start of a solution of something which is really, really important. For those of us who hover on the periphery of IT, we're amazed that the council is so dependent on the Microsoft applications, the Microsoft suite. I mean, once upon a time, when I was a young boy, it was quite a good product. It hasn't moved with the times. I think they're relying upon lock-in, that if you've got Microsoft Suite, it's difficult to move away. And so I think it is really good that we now have an officer team who are prepared to say what we provide to our customers is more important than just having the convenience of buying everything off the same shelf. The website is not good. I can't find anyone who would say that the website is good. What I wrote down in thinking about it, the first words that came into my head were old, expensive, non-compliant, difficult to search. In fact, what I do, because we have, although the town centre is still grappling with 4G and 5G, we actually have 1 gig fibre in the villages. So once a month, I actually download the entire static contents of the council's website, clearly not the transactional services, but just the static contents, so that I have it on my own system and I can instantly search and find anything I want, because if one has to rely upon the search facilities on the website, they are antiquated. So there is a huge task to be done. Great to hear that it's going to move on. When it comes to the online transactional services, you can't avoid them because many of the services provided by the council is the only provider. So if you want to pay for a wheelie bin, you've got to do it. But it really is clunky, and I'm glad to hear that that we're going to move forward on it. My only disappointment, and it's a very slight disappointment, Leader, is that one of the particular groups of customers who are always ignored is the councillors. And we certainly do battle with some pretty difficult systems. CMIS, for instance, where we have our own papers for this evening's, it has the most awful antiquated search facilities, and it may be me, but I just cannot find anything. You can search for one word, but if you've got a phrase looking for some historic decision, it's almost impossible to find it. We have some strange customs, like emails coming in from our constituents are of no technical sensitivity at all. Yet we elevate them to the highest possible sensitivity, and therefore will only deliver them to councillors under special controlled circumstances rather than just batting them through the system. And this causes all sorts of problems, particularly to my colleague, Councillor Buston, who is forever asking me why there isn't a decent solution to ensure that we expedite councillors' emails. And we have a spate of officers doing do-it-yourself forms, and they do it for an extremely good reason. They think they can automate their processes, save time, and actually move things forward faster. But from the councillors on the receiving end of this, it is a nightmare. So I would hope, while clearly the effort of this particular project is going to go into the real customer-facing services where they need better information about what we're doing, be able to get it quickly and more easily, and the online services need beefing up. If the services provided to the councillors can also be increased as a byproduct of this, I think there would probably be 51 members who would say hurrah for the third time. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed, Dennis, both of the welcome for what's happening, your interest in the subject, and for the observations which I'm sure Councillor Jay and Melissa Kempsell are listening to. We've heard them before, but that we need to keep hearing them, and I'm sure the opportunity is to feed back as we go. I'll go to Councillor Alison Jay.
Yeah,
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Councillor Willits, just to say completely upfront, I completely agree with the website, and I can tell you that under something very old from my workplace 20 years ago, colleagues are customers too, so part of this customer platform is very much I'm working with the team about making sure that we have the resources we need to do our jobs properly. So we're talking about spam filters, we're looking at ways of recording case histories so that they're open to new members as they come in, so sort of database keeping of historical information, and as you say, I've had a particular issue with the website myself this week where I couldn't find locality budgets and found some very old pages on the website. That's all going to be part of what's being looked at. So it's embedded into the customer experience. We are customers as well.
Thank you, that's brilliant. Would you like to round this out by some headlines from the paper? And then
So I
go
was
to
just going to
recommendations?
say, this was a very comprehensive and clear paper on our future strategy. I wanted to thank Mel and the wider team. They've made a huge effort when they've been dealing with a number of other issues, including the demands of 2 elections and our member briefings and dealing with individual member reports. And I'd like to thank her for her openness and transparency to myself as portfolio member. It is important to say as well that the customer service teams are really looking to this as well. I've spoken to them this week. They have an increasing number of calls of increasing complexity. They're dealing with them really well. Their waiting times are below target. Their call resolution and satisfaction data is on target, but the pressure is there that they have a correct digital progression in the future, that they have a good telephony and data capture, as well as self-service, so that as many of us who can deal with digital platforms do, so that they can focus on the people that are more vulnerable and need more support.
Thank you. Open up to other colleagues. Cabinet, anything for Alison or for Mel? I think the only thing I would say, apart from this is great work and great to be doing this with partners, it's a great illustration of what we can get from working with others with shared, and the value of shared services would just be that there's a 4-year, I think, assumption if I glance at the paper again. I think it'd be really important to have tangible benefits year on year. I'm sure that will be part of your detailed planning. If there's nothing else, then the recommendations for us, Alison, are in 2.A and B.
So first of all, to agree the approach to the digital customer programme, which leverages the partnership work in North Essex and specifically working with Epping Forest and Colchester City Councils. And secondly, to agree delegated authority for the portfolio holder to approve award of contracts in line with the approach and parameters in the report.
Are we so agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. Such a long wait for such a short period of stardom, but thank you very much indeed. Okay, in which case we go on to item 9.2, which is around year end. So this is 23-24 year end review of risk management. Alison.
You threw me for a moment. I thought you meant year end KPIs. Okay, so the report we've got in front of us is just an overview of the Council's risk management activity. I think today, more than ever, in the light of the recent Grenfell report that's been issued this morning, no one can fail to be aware of the importance of identifying risks, managing them. So this is looking at our risk strategy, our risk register and the risk matrix, how we assess risks, manage risks and move forwards. The highest strategic risk has been identified as cyber and data security, and we've just seen that the digital transformation lead is aware that this is a priority. We've just spoken about the platform improvements, and then there's other identified risks, organisational resilience, budget strategy, economic climate, the well-being of our workforce, financial equality and corporate assets. Some of these are obviously internal risks, some will be external, of which we're not directly in control, but we still need to be able to identify and mitigate for those risks. The paper has gone through scrutiny. They have agreed to the continuation of the current strategy. What they have asked us to look at is that we look at specific project risks being worked into the strategy, and I've had a discussion with Hayley McGrath, and work is currently being done with the project management office at how the data can be captured and incorporated, and that will be going as a narrative to the next GNA taking place in January. I'll be seeing the draft before that.
Thank you. If I might, Dennis, do you still want to talk on this item? We'd be very welcome if you still do. If you'd like to add.
I think it was really covered, Chairman. It was a harrowing experience this morning listening to the report on Grenfell. it was worrying the number of occasions the chairman mentioned failures of the local authority in a whole, right the way across the board, from building regulations to emergency procedures for housing and so on, resilience. And I got out the risk register and said, how many of those issues are covered by our analysis of risk? And it was my intention to speak on that, but the portfolio holder started off with that item, which I think is phenomenally important, and I just hope that we're going to carry out a further review to make sure that our house is 100% in order should such a terrible thing ever happen in the city.
Thank you very much for that reinforcement, and these conversations, and Councillor J. Astor have me alongside them, but we engage with members across the chamber as we should, but we engage in committee and some really good quality conversations, and I think it's really important. So I thank you, Councillor Willett, for your part in that, and your colleagues as well, that we have that to make the most of those opportunities to ask the searching question. I think it'd be worth us bringing out, wouldn't it, Councillor J, that within the paper it's plain that the senior leadership team are paying yet more attention to risk, as you need to in challenging times. And I hope the Chief Exec will allow me to say, because I know it's true, that they are thoughtful about the things that happen outside of Colchester and their implications for us here in the city. Pam.
I wasn't going to speak, David, but you mentioned my name, so I just wanted to take the opportunity to say that it is of the highest importance, and in fact, the subject of risk is taken very seriously by us all, but in particular the 3 statutory officers. And good practice illustrates, in previous reports of failings elsewhere, that regular meetings between the Section 151, the monitoring officer, and the Chief Executive are critical to maintaining a focus on risk. That's all we talk about every month is risk. And we've now started a discipline of reporting that in to our findings and our discussions into the Cabinet and in an informal way. I'm actively giving thought to how we might do that more formally. But I don't think I can recall a time when risk has been a higher priority for this council than now.
Thank you very much indeed. And before I go back to it, and the Grenfell piece is really important, not just because it's about a terrible event, but because it shows systemic failure in government that goes back decades. That you can find something very wrong to the point that failures cost lives repeatedly, and you could repeatedly have this drawn as the executive at national level to your attention, and then nothing actually practically seems to make much difference. The standards don't change much, regulations don't change much, enforcement doesn't seem to be working. So we have to kind of be alive to a national weakness, systemic weakness. We're not going to have it here in Colchester. At least if we do, it will be despite all our efforts. Alison, back to you.
Highlight exactly the same, that I think we have a detailed structure of governance and ownership, that I've been in meetings where it's been very obvious that the senior leadership team and the chief executive place really high importance on risk and our analysis of risk. I think really that there's no changes to the strategy, but I think the process works, and what we need to do is reflect along the lines of, we're in a really challenging risk environment at the moment, so all the things that are shown as high priority we are focused on and are going to continue to be a priority as we go through the budget process. It's got to guide the way that we work as a council.
Thank you, that's really well said. If it doesn't reflect itself in resource decisions, it's just words and air, and they have their value, he says to Councillor Goss, who has views on these things. It doesn't matter what we say and how we say it, but you had to follow through, and resource allocation is following through. All right, is there anything else from anybody else? Alison, are you content to go through the recommendations?
Okay, so the recommended decision was that we consider and comment on the council's progress and performance in managing risk, that we
Agreed? Are you in exactly the right place? Yes, the final half sentence really matters. And I'm reminded of it, let's say it out loud. It is in the report to recommend to full council that it be included.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Jay, and thank you for your personal role in this. It is the collective effort that makes the difference. So thank you also, Councillor Willits, again. Okay, cracking on then to 9 point.
Do we agree?
We did agree. Do we agree?
Agree.
Okay, and that includes now Councillor Corey. Right, for the record, on to 9.3. It's never the same, Mark, without you on board. All right, on to year end on these strategic plan.
Okay, so these are the key performance indicators and our strategic plan delivery plan as at the end of 23-24. We know that we get regular KPIs as portfolio holders. We're supported by the more detailed service KPIs that we receive, which track performance and look at forecast. This is just the year-end position. The council has agreed 26 performance indicators which align with the strategic plan, and the overall position at the end of March was that 18 targets were achieved and are green and 7 did not meet the target. It's worth noting that some of the green that have been exceeded, the housing benefit and local council tax scheme, where residents were receiving benefits in above target number of days. We also need to mention, we were talking about income generation earlier, where leisure centre income and museum income has exceeded targets, and also look at the garden waste, where though there's a decreased number of households that have been taking part in the service, the actual weight still going to the tips remains the same, which means that we're keeping our target. Fly tipping has actually gone down 13% on target, so the introduction of recycling and waste changes hasn't had any sort of impact on residual waste at the moment. Having said that, there are obviously some reds, but having spoken to heads of services, I'm confident that we have good ways forward. Bereavement services income is down 13%, but is now back to pre-COVID levels, and they're confident about the figures that they've got going forward. They also have a new website and some new memorial schemes with some better marketing, and the latest update is that income has been increasing according to plan. Trees planted and improving biodiversity. I think this came to scrutiny and it was agreed that we must be better as a council in this area. There is a review ongoing, and it's going to go back to scrutiny later in the year. We've spoken earlier this evening about households in temporary accommodation, the KPIs for temporary accommodation, the time to relet council homes and repairs being completed within target timescales have been an issue. We've changed the contractor in terms of the time to relet council homes, and that's already had a positive impact, and the time of repairs has dropped from 31 to 28 days. The benchmarking, which was missing at the time of my scrutiny meeting, has now been provided, and there's some really good clear graphs at the back on the housing, which shows that we are at or below the median, so we're performing better than most other councils in this area. Not that we should take that as being satisfactory, but it does mean that we're in the right area. And the other one is social value in procurement, but I know that, again, in leadership discussions, that this is very much part and parcel of what's being discussed. The strategy plan, there's detailed narrative on this, so I didn't really feel that there was anything that particularly needed picking up. I just think it's, I will pick up on the point from scrutiny that they were asking if intended outcomes and impacts could be listed against targets, and we're going to look at this to see what can be added to the narrative, but just to reassure that individual portfolio briefings, we're receiving the more detailed information and the performance figures, and then we can be proactive rather than reactive.
Thank you. I think that covers that well. I note that attached here is the panel observations. There's no specific recommendations. At least I can't see any. So you've touched on that, I think, in a way that's helpful to see that it's an engagement process where you and others and officers are looking at the realities we see and seeking to improve where we can. It's really important. So, colleagues, in the round, we've got a comprehensive picture here that's frank about where we have some shortfalls and where action's being taken. It's frank about where some minor improvements can be made, but is in the round, in challenging circumstances, you know, a pretty good take on a council, despite its difficulties, that's delivering pretty well, some cases exceptionally well. So the recommended decision is that we review and ensure robust performance management, but so that's the reasons to do it. So there's 2.1, 2.2. Shall I do this for you, Alison? Review performance, I would say that we've done that. Ensure corrective action, that's covered in the report. Review performance against the SPAP, the Strategic Plan Delivery Plan, rather. And where goals or associated actions have not been completed, ensure corrective action. Is there anything, Alison, beyond what's covered in the report that you would want to pull out for colleagues? I think it's a rounded story and it shows where we are and where we're going next. Are we content?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Alison. Okay. In which case we're on to 10.1. Waiting for corrections, see if I've forgotten anybody. It would appear not for a change. North Essex Shared Services. Okay, look, this is down for me, so as briefly as I can. So this sets out the relationships we have with other councils, in particular with our colleagues at Braintree and Epping, and indeed we've seen some illustrations of that from Mel today. And it describes the service position and the relationship position and makes it plain it's scalable. We can do more with others over time. It's worth reminding ourselves that partnership and shared services is not new. So we have it for the museum service with Ipswich. We have it for North Essex Parking Partnership. Councillor Goss loves that. And we do it for payroll services. We're doing it at the Garden Community. And time goes by, and we've been at that a while, a long way to go yet, but that's a collective endeavour with a shared team. We do it with recruitment with the help of Essex, and of course we've got some senior roles which are shared between ourselves and Epping. So this is not new, we've got a track record in it, but it is complex, and this paper sets out some of the complexity and some of the issues that have to be worked through and flags up the areas where the focus is most now in terms of what we might do next. That's how I will put it, what we might do next. So finance and ICT, well, we're aware of both of those. HR and I think looking more difficult, revenues and benefits. I don't want to repeat all of that, but you and we need to be aware that this journey will continue to have to be a patient one so that we get the right conditions, the right leadership, and it's going to take continued trust and continued focus, but I would say to you it's worth it. We need to identify, I think, the financial returns. People will expect us to do that, but quite rightly, the focus at the early stage, which is where we're still at from my perspective, I say to the Chief Exec, is about resilience, capability and capacity. We need those or we swiftly get ourselves into difficulty. So I don't intend to say more than that, but I welcome other views. I'll start with Mark.
Thank you, David. I fully support this approach, and you're absolutely right. It is about reducing costs, but it's also about capacity and resilience and shared good practice. And we are a leading authority. We rank really well in a number of areas, and that's because of good leadership from the top with Pam and excellent officers, but also working hand in hand with politicians at a very honest and adult level. And that's the same as what we need to do across Essex. What I would say is we are absolutely going in with our eyes open. So when we've talked about procurement and when we've talked about working with the Essex Procurement Service, we haven't dived straight in with that. We've actually looked at that and thought, what is it that Colchester could benefit from and how could Colchester's approach work or be different to that? And we haven't gone all the way with them on that. We've taken a step back because we believe we can actually find better quality, perhaps working with close neighbours and not as part of the whole partnership. However, we'll be on the periphery, working with them, making the opportunities where we can. So completely agree with you, and just want to reassure residents and businesses that we are doing this with our eyes open in a way that will only benefit us in the future, whether that be on service delivery, whether that be on cost, whether that be on quality, and keeping the focus on Colchester, the city and the district and the borough, making sure everyone benefits from this, primarily Colchester residents.
Thank you very much. That's well said. It's not surrendering our needs or our position when we talk about cross-boundary work. It's to acknowledge that we are stronger locally for doing things together well. And that's the key, isn't it? Doing it well. Any other observations from colleagues or comments from? No, I see none. I see. Oh, I do. I have the chief exec in my blind spot. Never to be recommended.
Thank you, David. So this is an important week for shared services for lots of different reasons, but this report has gone to, or is about to, gone to the other two cabinets as well. And I think that's a really important statement that we've tried to coordinate and coalesce around an agreed approach. It's also an important week because we've taken on this week a new programme manager, Nick Cave. So this is my opportunity to thank Mel for the way that she has led the programme management of shared services over the last months, over the last year or so. We've expected a lot of her in terms of the breadth of responsibilities, but Mark, you used the word focus, and now the time has come to focus even further on the delivery of some of the benefits of this arrangement. And I think having a dedicated but shared resource across the three authorities is a good move. But thank you to Mel for her contribution today.
Thank you very much indeed, Pam. Anything else from colleagues? Echo the thanks to Mel and the team. All right, okay, thank you very much indeed, in which case recommended decision is to note the work undertaken to date and the proposed approach to the Colchester, Braintree and Epping Forest District Council shared service programme. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. In which case I'm feeling strangely excited. This is the Martin Goss show for the next few items, I believe. Martin, the first one of which is waste strategy for Essex.
So there are three items. The first one is the waste strategy for Essex. This has been consulted on across all of Essex, and the new waste strategy that Essex County Council has come up with from 2024 to 2054 is very strategic, and all 13 districts have worked with Essex. And this also feeds into, or is fed really from, the changes in the Environment Act set by government, which has also been consulted on, and also feeds into what Colchester is currently doing, reviewing its own waste service and its collection methodology and everything else associated with it. So what I'm not going to do is go through it in great detail, but what the strategy does do is really take heed from what the law is stating, and this is around a number of areas. So it is what waste will be collected from the doorstep. So for instance, every council has to collect garden waste, food waste, etc. Now Colchester already does everything it's expected, and if you go across the board to tendering, for instance, they don't collect glass, but actually the strategy and law is absolutely stating that you must collect glass. So it's not telling you how you collect it, it's telling you what you collect, and that will also include cartons, which currently are quite hard to recycle. They will also be collected from the doorstep in future. So in the report you can see the actual strategy, which is quite well laid out from Essex, and really I think the key thing, the most salient thing to look at is the years starting in 2026, which state exactly what councils need to collect. And Colchester's already punching above its weight and has done for some years and will continue to do that. We will ensure that plastic film can be recycled from 2027. Now Colchester used to do that, but it's one of the hardest plastics to recycle, and by law, we will have to reintroduce that as part of the Environment Act anyway. It would be good if food producers actually got rid of it in its entirety, but there's a whole separate piece going on with the Environment Act and what onus will be put very much back on supermarkets, producers, etc. Now, Essex has put that they'll stop using landfill by 2030, but of course they've already come out of a press release in the last few weeks to say that we will start to process stuff at Rivenhall from October 2025, which means that it will be used to make energy rather than going straight into landfill. And of course, Stanway is one of the landfill sites which will run out of capacity. So that is a major step change, which I think is really, really important. And from 2035, Essex is looking that we will recycle and compost, etc., 65% of waste, with an ambition of getting to 70%. And there are some other targets in there as well. So we've adopted this, or we plan to adopt this, hopefully as a council tonight. And as I say, this is feeding into the excellent work that Rosa and her team have been doing, which will also be coming back to Cabinet at some point in the future, where we look at how we collect waste, etc. So happy to take any questions, but I would think it's very self-explanatory and has been well publicised and has been well consulted on across Essex.
Thank you very much indeed, colleagues. I would just echo, as I know others would, there is a clarity which is really helpful, isn't it, in the Essex Waste strategy, and you touched on it, about what has to be done when, and I think it's really helpful, Martin, that you reminded everybody that the path we're on is one that's been set. Some would say it's late and overdue. It sets a framework we have to follow, are following ahead and part of it, which will then reflect itself in our local collection approach, which we'll get to later in the year. So thank you very much. That connectivity is really useful. Anything else from anybody else? If not, then the recommended decisions, Martin, are in 2.1 and 2.2. To approve the waste strategy in the form appended and to note others are doing the same. Are we content? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your work on this and for Rosa's help and support with colleagues. It's been a while coming, hasn't it? But it's really useful to see. Thank you. Martin, on to the next item, which is, we've got two more, which are around procurement.
Indeed, one on fuel, one on glass. I won't take them together, but are similar. So the first one, which is 11.2, this is about the glass recycling. We recycle a significant amount of glass collected from the doorstep, over 4,000 tonnes, and this is purely a piece of work to re-procure that and go out to tender and try and get even more income from our glass, and that is all this report is stating. So it's delegating the power all of the authority down to officers and the portfolio holder, and the recommended decisions are under, or the recommended decision, there's only one, is under 2.1, which is to delegate authority to the portfolio holder for waste, neighbourhoods and leisure, that's me, in consultation with the chief operating officer, that's Richard Block, to appoint a contractor after a compliant tender process. So if everyone's happy, it's as simple as that.
Agreed. Thank you.
And then 11.3 is to procure our, or re-tender our fuel contract. We have a ability to hold fuel up at Shrub End Depot, which can help you in effect store fuel to ensure that we can hold our price, and the contract value is probably around about £725,000, can be over £1 million, and we have quite a capacity there. What's also good about this contract is we can buy different types of fuels, because actually our the majority of our fleet actually can use vegetable oil, for instance, and other biofuels as well, which is quite good, as well as diesel. One of the reasons we stopped using HVO, which is the hydrated or hydro-treated vegetable oil, was because cost, unfortunately, meant due to a shortage of getting it and such a high demand from many councils, the cost of it was way above diesel. So there's always this dichotomy about environment versus cost. So we have the ability to procure that in the contract. So this is purely sending out a new tender, to award a contract for the supply of the liquid fuels from 1st of October to 30th of September 2025. The recommended decision is to award the contract for the supply of liquid fuels at the Shrub End Depot for use by the Council's fleet for the period 1st of October 24 to the 30th of September 25, so it's only a year, to include the option to extend the supply contract for a further year, so that would be to the 30th of September 2026, subject to the performance of RICS Petroleum under the ESPO Liquid Frames framework. So that is it. If everyone is happy, that is what we will do.
Agreed? Thank you very much, Martin. And that is the end of the Martin Goss Show. Thank you, Martin. In all seriousness, you pay a lot of attention to your portfolio, as I know other colleagues do, and that helps officers and it helps the public, even if it's unseen. Next item is item 12.1, antisocial behaviour motion from council. We had 3 speakers. So Bob has had to leave. That leaves us with Councillor Law and Councillor Scorless. And I think in the circumstances, I'd like to hear from colleagues first before we talk about it as a cabinet. Would you like to come up, Jocelyn? Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I wanted to speak, as I did, for Council in support of the motion on antisocial behaviour that was moved by my colleague, Councillor Lee Scordis. You know, I think really what I want to emphasise tonight is the importance of a collaborative approach, because dealing with antisocial behaviour, keeping our communities and residents safe, you know, that's something that all of us, you know, around this table and all of us in the council chamber support. And I'm very grateful to be able to attend the portfolio holder briefings for communities with Councillor Summers. You know, very grateful for her very proactive and sort of, again, collaborative approach in terms of including people from other parties, you know, and very grateful to the officers for the updates they give us there on their work. You know, as I say, we have to sort of work with people in the communities. And I think it's really important to thank the frontline workers, you know, and our council wardens that are dealing with antisocial behaviour on a daily basis. Like other sort of public sector workers, like in the NHS or our armed forces and the police, you know, these people are putting themselves, you know, in the front line to help keep us and the communities safe. So I'm very grateful, you know, for their work. You know, for example, I contacted members and council staff about a particular issue in terms of antisocial behaviour in the city centre on Sunday night, you know, and an officer got back to me on Monday and was detailing how this matter was in hand. So again, you know, grateful for that proactive approach. I know that, you know, police are often very stretched. You know, we've seen particular incidences this summer, and so that can sometimes mean that staffing is diverted to other places. But and you know, it's very important that our council wardens and council staff are able to work productively with police, you know, in an operational way to help keep our city centre safe for residents and to keep those who are vulnerable on the streets safe as well. So I really look forward to, in the future, how we can, you know, move forward that working with the police, particularly the collaboration at a strategic level to help leverage and influence people to ensure that operationally we have, you know, police who are able to be deployed in Colchester to work on matters with council staff. You know, as I say, I just really want to emphasise, I'm really grateful to our police and our community policing officers who do so much for us, so fully support them, but very keen to work with all people in the council in terms of making sure that we have enough deployed and that, you know, council staff are supported to be able to make enforcements to tackle issues where necessary. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. I think I'd just sort of say that Councillor Somers and I closely engaged with this. Perhaps we'll leave the commentary till after Councillor Scortis has spoken, but welcome your support for what's happening and that you feel engaged and part of what's happening, because we should be doing that as partners in running the council, to be frank, but we should do this cross-party. And I think very much I could reflect on all the words you've said and play them back to you and say that's how we're doing things. And that's how we should be doing things, listening to the public, working with our partners at every level, including Police and Fire and Crime Commissioner. We shouldn't underestimate is that's the strategic level, and we play at that level as well as locally. Oh, look, that's too much for me, but let's stop there. Ask for Councillor Scortis if he could come forward, if that's all right. And if at the end of it you've got a burning point to make, I'll ask you or Lee to come back. So Lee, would you like to come forward? Thank you. And I shall ask Councillor Somers to start our response on what is an executive motion, in effect, as it's referred to us. Lee, please.
Quite, thank you very much. And yeah, we had a passionate and robust debate at full council on this. I'm really here just to make sure that we do take this motion seriously. Even just popping out to Tesco for a few drinks, there's still antisocial behaviour going out there, with people shouting at each other in the street, no police around, security guard at Tesco didn't know what to do. It's not a nice atmosphere. And I know it's low level stuff, but it's not things we were seeing a few years ago when we were dealing with this. So there's clearly been a change in that relationship. And I do still have concerns about police resources being taken out of Colchester, because, you know, the Crime Commissioner can use politics and claim we've got more officers on the street than ever, but they're not in Colchester half the time, and that is a serious issue. And I think we do need to push that with the Crime Commissioner and the Chief Inspector regularly, because there are clearly still issues, there are gaps to get where we need to be to make Colchester a lot safer. So we're halfway there, but we're not where we need to be, because there clearly are still some of those issues. And it will be a bit easier now. Schools are back. We know a lot of some of the issues were teenagers causing issues. So that's not going to be happening during the summer holidays all day. So we should expect more, is what I'm hoping. As I say, the council's doing its end. I think we need to make sure that I am all for collaboration, but if one side's taking the side down, we can't just ignore that. We have to have those honest conversations with them to make sure we have, as I say, a much safer city centre, as well as our urban areas where residents have similar concerns around drug dealing and other issues of antisocial behaviour.
Thank you very much indeed. Matt.
Thanks both for your comments there. Yes, we have, obviously we had this motion brought to full council, and as Lee said, it was a very robust discussion. We've recently had 2 weeks of action in the city centre. I think there's been over 174 engagements with various people to do with street drinking and other antisocial behaviour. So the police and the wardens have been working on that together. We're looking at getting in handheld devices so that we can send fines on the spot, because obviously at the moment if someone's been committing an offence and the wardens want to fine them for it, they've had to come back here, write it up and then take it back out to them, and obviously, you know, they may or may not be there. So we can now do that on the spot. We've got the pads to do it now, and we're getting the devices in shortly, I believe, on that. Councillor King and I, we've also been working quite closely with the BID to discuss issues in the high street and around the shopping centres, and Colin Cox, Commander Colin Cox has been coming along to those meetings as well. And also we've been visiting the library to talk about the antisocial behaviour issues they've been having there. We've been putting in the tags so that the wardens have to go all the way into the library so that they actually have a good look around. And obviously with the library closing down the year, they're looking at designing in ways of deterring antisocial behaviour there in the future. So we are making progress. Crime figures obviously statistically continue to fall, whether that's, as I say, it's very much at odds with public perception, I know, but as I believe Councillor Gocher mentioned in the full council meeting, there is a difference sometimes with what people consider to be antisocial behaviour when it actually is an actual crime, and so it's recorded as a crime rather than antisocial behaviour, so it's understanding the difference between those. But our commitment to driving down and driving out antisocial behaviour is not wavering. You know, we are gonna keep doing it, and yeah, if we catch you, you're gonna get done.
Spot on, Martin.
I think from experience myself in the last few days, there are absolutely police out there, and the piece I keep passionately pushing to people that Facebook crime is you must report it to the police, you must report it online, you must report it in person. Now, last Friday, I dialed 999 because I witnessed a drug deal going on in Mile End whilst I was covertly litter picking, watching what was going on. And in 3 Crowns Road, there were drug deals going on 6 times a day, prolifically going on. In fact, horrendously stupidity was going on, and I witnessed it. And it was because of residents continually phoning, continually reporting that there's now been arrests. And what it did do was push and this is heroin, it's not marijuana, we're talking heroin. So people were jacking up and smoking heroin in my community, and this was seen. And they moved it to the Burgolt Road play area, where there were young children and mothers that witnessed it. And this went on 6 times a day, because it was pushed from 3 Crowns Road up to Burgolt Road, and then it was pushed into the alleyway of Hugh Dixon Road to Mile End Road. And then other residents did the same thing. They kept going up there, disturbing what was going on and phoning the police. And when I was out for a run 2 nights ago, or a slow jog, I bumped into a police officer by the Simbalone Meadows underpass because it had also been happening there. And he told me the police were out in force because of what had happened. They'd been stopping and searching people, they'd found some drugs, and as I understand it, he told me who they were looking for, and as I understand it, there's been arrests made. And this is all in the last few days from the efforts by the police and the community. And that is a live case study where it proves if you pull your finger out, you work with the police and you use the system as it was designed, you can go after criminals, and the police do care about drug dealing, and they do care about stolen mopeds that this guy was running around on, and the community worked together. And social media did work well then, because this was being shared and I put posts out about it. So that's a good live case study from this week. And I just want to thank Essex Police, because they come in for a lot of criticism, unfairly, and that's where they've worked really hard to get on, and I didn't really intervene in it, in fairness.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to echo that. The report, as Martin said, you know, if you talk about it on Facebook, the police aren't reading it. You need to actually report it to the police, and the more reports they get, the more likely that the information they get and the data they will get will lead to them taking action, and they will know where all this is happening. But if you don't report it, then crime reports are going down, and we don't get the resources. So it's, you know, if you're not reporting crime, you are actually enabling it in the first place. So you need to keep reporting.
I think that's really well said. To the specific of the motion, we should just acknowledge that we didn't all take the same view on some of the way this was expressed. But what we do have is a shared understanding that it matters in the wider sense, antisocial behaviour, not just wider crime. Antisocial behaviour in all its form matters because it disquiets people in their community, makes a difference to the quality of their life. We as a council are absolutely on it, best we are able with our resources, and we've expanded those at peak times and we'll continue to do that. Our partners, we have their attention at a senior level, and I just like to sort of say from my part, it's that wider community piece, including businesses who deserve to feel that they're being given a listening as well, that really matters. So I think we're on this as much as we're able, and we need to keep doing it, which I understood Councillor Scottish Lee was what you're really saying, keep it. So we will keep on it, we'll involve others. Councillor Liddy is one other councillor which I mentioned to, because he's devoted to this as well in the past and in the present, and he has his own insights into this, which I know are given a good listening as well. So I think we're doing relatively well, and our partners are doing their very best. I thank you for the praise for what they do and the example you've given, Councillor Goss Martin. That's really helpful. Colleagues, this is an executive matter. I think we're asked to consider it. I suggest that we've done that, and that we've acted on it. We were doing that at the time of the discussion. We consent to close on that basis. Thank you. In which case, we are at the end. I thank visiting councillors who are leaving. I don't blame you, and officers as well. And we're on to item 13.1, progress responses to the public. I believe that looked up to date to me. Is anything you want to say?
I've nothing further to add to the report, Chair. I think it's all up to date.
In which case we get on to, after the magic words have been uttered by the Deputy Leader, one of his prime responsibilities is, and he hasn't got a sheet of paper. Have you got the words we need to move? Have a look.
There must be another sheet.
Ah, those ones. Oh, beg your pardon. Good point. Right. No, I give it to you.
Thank you, dear Leader.
Thank you, folks.
So I move that in accordance with section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 and in accordance with the Local Authorities Regulations 2012, the public, including members of the press, be excluded from the meeting for the following items as they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 and 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act. Do we agree?
Agreed.